Today on Across the Fence, we're just across the lake from Vermont at Fort Ticonderoga. Hi, I'm Leonard Perry with the University of Vermont. I've been coming to the fort in the King's Garden for many years, but I've been coming a lot more last couple of years as a consultant to the King's Garden, where I help them with plant problems and horticultural practices in general. Today we'll be visiting with a couple of people who have a big role here at the fort and will tell us a lot more about the fort and the gardens. Let's begin our visit with an overview of the importance of the fort with CEO Beth Hill. Thanks so much, Beth, for spending a few minutes with us today.
Wonderful, Leonard. I'm delighted to be here. Well, as you know, Fort Ticonderoga sits in one of the most strategic locations in North America. And in the 18th century, this great Hudson-Champlain corridor determined the fate of the continent in the 18th century. And Ticonderoga sat at the front line, whether it was the French, the British, or the American, in holding the line for empire and nation building, what ultimately became America. Fort Ticonderoga includes 2,000 acres today of some of America's most historic landscape, and we are so grateful to have such an incredible preservation story as well as a restoration story. So on our landscape, we have layers of history. So in addition to the 18th century story in the armies of France, England, and the Americans who held this place of importance, we also almost immediately go into a story of preservation and tourism. In 1820, William Ferris Pell acquired the land and launched America's first private preservation effort. And this site sat as a place of hospitality for tourists in the 19th century who came to view the ruins and enjoy the fruits of the landscape when they stayed in the hotel here on the property. And then in the 20th century, our museum founders launched America's earliest restoration project. So we have all of these stories to share, and certainly the beauty on the water as well as the land and then on Mount Defiance.
It's not just seeing an old fort or a garden.
Exactly. Well, this is one of the things I'm most excited about, because every day is an event at Fort Ticonderoga and every year is a new experience. And it really is a much broader audience than, say, people who are military history buffs. You know, we do have the amazing fort, stunning collections and new exhibitions each year, historic trades programs, but we also carry our visitors' experience onto the landscape and onto the water. We have a beautiful boat that is a recreation of a late 19th century touring boat that we see in the North Country and Lake George and up in the Finger Lakes and Lake Champlain. And so guests can go onto the water and enjoy not only the natural beauty, but see this incredible story and the layers, the centuries of stories from Lake Champlain. So that certainly is part of the experience. The gardens, and I know you'll talk about them more, certainly are really an incredible aspect and do highlight the centuries of stories here. And as well on Mount Defiance, every day we offer tours. So we've become an all-day experience for guests, and really it is a very broad and diverse experience for them.
To me, it's fascinating just seeing the trades that are depicted here too. I know you make a lot of things on site.
Exactly. You know, our focus in material culture, I think, is one of the unique aspects of our brand here and our experience at Fort Ticonderoga, because we have such vast collections. That is fundamental and supports every activity we do. So if it's recreating the clothing for the Army that we're representing that year, or even what garden aspects we have, that is driven by our collections. And that does really help get into a more nuanced story. It's not just shooting muskets and cannons, albeit people love that, and those are popular aspects, but it's very specific narratives that we're telling, as well as the everyday life of people that were here, whether it be soldier or tourists or preserving family with the Pell family and the story we're telling of them, or even, you know, bringing it forward to today and our guests today and how they're engaged.
How can people find out more about all these activities and how to get here and hours and all the details?
Well, our website has all the information you need as far as the type of tours we offer, special events, and our calendar of events, and even membership. So guests can get in for free if they have a membership or a private nonprofit educational organization. So check out our website and also our telephone. We're happy to take your calls and learn more about the Fort Ticonderoga experience.
Now we're with the Director of Interpretation for Fort Ticonderoga, who's also in charge of the garden, Stuart Lilie. So thanks so much, Stuart, for spending a few minutes with us today.
I love being down here in the garden, just so beautiful.
It is a beautiful place, and there are lots of gardens. In fact, there's this wall garden we're in, but there's some outside. Tell us about some of these gardens, how they came to be.
The King's Garden is our chance to tell the layers of stories of gardens that really go back centuries. Outside we have our native garden, and that represents not only the plants that people think of, such as the beans and corns and squash, but some other ones that folks wouldn't necessarily think were part of native agriculture. The name King's Garden, it comes from what was a French soldier's garden, what they called the Jardin du Roi. And so outside we have a soldier's garden bed, and just as we change what we portray across the whole site, so too that garden bed, it changes from being, well, last year it was a French soldier's garden. This year it's a British and an American soldier's garden. And
so each year you change the year you're depicting at the whole fort, including at the garden.
Including the completely different plants. I mean, there's certainly some overlap because some things were really popular, greens, cabbage, but some plants, potatoes, it's only Anglo-American. The French, ironically enough, because think of French fries today, were not particularly popular. Now this garden, it's next to this beautiful house called the Pavilion. This whole peninsula, after its military history, it was bought in 1820 by William Ferris Pell, who built one house and then replaced it with a new one, the Pell Pavilion, the center of which, built in 1826, still stands, and he continued the tradition of the King's Garden and really farmed the entire site. In fact, this place was known as the Fort Ticonderoga Farms right at the end of the 19th century. And we have, to represent that, we have the Pell family garden, which in contrast to the soldier's garden, which is all things you have to harvest that same year, the Pell family garden is filled with perennial foodstuffs, things like strawberries and asparagus, things which have to be in the ground year after year before you get fruit. And they're representative of a new American republic that's flowering and growing. It also represents, too, the fact that the Pell Pavilion, it turned into a hotel. And so these are also emblematic of hospitality. We also, what we're in right now, well, it's another legacy of the Pell family. This is really emblematic of the reconstruction of the fort. The walls that surround us, they were designed and constructed by the same architect who did the reconstruction of the fort, Mr. Alfred Bossum. And he went out of his way to include little chunks of stone here and there to make it look old, and also built just a wonderful English tea house in the corner and designed the brick paths and even the barberry that line everything. That's all Alfred Bossum.
That goes back to the early part of the 1900s.
Yeah, most of it's from about 1912 when all of this was set in, along with many of the fabulous trees that still stand covering our landscape. The design that you see inside this walled garden, though, it was updated. One of the first female graduates of the MIT Landscape Architecture program, Marion Kruger Coffin, she redesigned all the flower beds to make what were huge blocks of beds filled with flowers, and make them have swaths of color, brush strokes, and a variety of textures, both of the leaves and stems, but also of the flowers themselves, and created just the gorgeous composition that you see here today.
Tell us a little bit about the colors, because I know one of our things was to have the cool at one end and the warm, and it seems to bring the garden closer, because it is a very long rectangular garden.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that. And
this garden was designed to be looked back from the pavilion, that hotel itself, and then family home again, and looked outwards. And so the cooler colors, the whites and the lavenders and the kind of rosy hued pinks, those were supports to, obviously they're beautiful, but they kind of send the eye outwards into warmer colors, your oranges, your salmons, even maroons, and even some blacks that were intermixed amongst poppies further out in the garden. And so it would give you this, kind of visual interest to draw your eye and hopefully the individual themselves to explore further out into this garden.
Now, no, it wasn't just a necessary cool here, line, warm there. It was kind of a transition that I guess you're trying to get back toward.
Yeah, for a long time we thought of it as a rather stark contrast, exactly as you say, but when we really get down into our plan, and we're lucky, we have this huge, many feet wide paper plan detailing every single bed. Well, it's swaths of blue and yellow intermixed across the whole area, and so it was a very subtle transition. It was something that, if you were casually observing the garden at the time, you probably wouldn't realize that it was visually having that effect on your eye.
The other thing I wanted to ask about, there's some other gardens that we didn't mention. There's a children's garden out there. Tell us about some of these other gardens.
That garden's a lot of fun. We every year we play a little bit in our children's garden and do, some beds are designed to educate. We've got an alphabet garden here that goes from flowers from A to Z. We've got a wonderful pollinator garden. Native pollinators are such a big topic these days and very important for all of our horticultural success. And so we've got a garden that has all the flowers that really do such a wonderful job of feeding and cultivating those native bees and other pollinators. We play with sunflowers and making a house and ornamental grasses, and it's just such a wonderful place for young and the young in heart to go out and explore the size of flowers and just revel in it. We also have our really wonderful, we just started this year, our farm-to-table garden. I mean, local agriculture is in many ways, it's the current reality of the Champlain Valley and agriculture therein. And we wanted to both tell that story and be a part of it as well. And our farm-to-table garden, its job is to grow produce to go up in our cafe. Fresh lettuce and tomatoes and cucumbers and all those kind of modern popular vegetables which people can enjoy every day in our cafe.
Cut flowers too, I guess you have a bed for
Yeah,
those.
well, in some ways that tells a story too. The various, the matriarchs of the Pell family, whether it's Sarah Pell or some of the more recent ones, they just had to fill the rooms of the pavilion with cut flowers. And so we have our cut flower garden that represents that, but it also provides the decorative flowers for not only in our cafe, but any of our wonderful parties that we throw, and just it provides that the beautiful the stems and flowers to make that happen.
There are a few small fruits out there, some grapes, some apple trees, and I know those are historic too.
The grapes we have out there, we recently dated the vines, and it turns out they're from all the way back in 1909. They were likely planted either personally or by the orders of Sarah Pell herself, and so they've stood now for over 100 years. We also have a beautiful apple orchard, which we're kind of learning a lot more about. It dates to about the same time as the walls, right around 1910 to 1912, and at one point there was as many as 600 trees. So just a massive orchard, and at the time when it was done, just a tremendous diversity of apples. Varietals which now are only being rediscovered after lots and lots of sort of a monoculture of very few apple varietals. We've got a tremendous number of cider apples and eating apples and just all sorts of ones which we're just trying to figure out exactly what they were.
That really ties into one of the big events. You have several, garden festival that I'm excited to help with each year. In the spring and the fall you have a harvest festival. And how do people find out more about all the gardens themselves, but all these events, and where to find this?
The best place to look that up is going to be on our website, www.fortticonderoga.org. You can find calendars, schedules, ticketing, what's going on in the garden, what's available to do for families. We put as much as we can in there so folks can plan out their visit.
I know you've got, for people into the social media, Facebook, you've got a blog. I know I'm contributing
Yes,
some
you
to your
do.
blog as well, so you can learn a lot. Well, thanks so much today, Stuart, for all your time, and I'd like to thank Beth Hill for joining us as well. And thank you for watching today on Across the Fence. For the University of Vermont, I'm Leonard Perry.